I am Carinne,
And I'm Andrew.
and we are the new Botanist. Today we're talking about the devil's ivy. Andrew, can you tell us about its real name and where it's come from?
So this is commonly known in the UK as devil's ivy, but in lots of parts of the world, it's also known as pothos or hunter's robe. And the English common name is derived from it being a mysterious plant growing out of the middle of nowhere. So it therefore must be the devil that's caused the growth, and it's called devil's ivy because the leaves almost look like ivy. And the botanical name, the correct sort of name to use, is Epipremnum aureum. And it's originally from Southeast Asia, and it's a perennial vine, and it grows in a range of conditions. So it's usually indirect sunlight, and it's very tolerant. So these plants grow on trees, obviously on the vines, so they grow up the trees in rainforests. But the key difference, and it'll surprise a lot of people, the leaves are colossal on these things. But in house plants, obviously don't get anywhere near that because the humidity and all the conditions aren't right, and generally in our homes. But in the rainforest, the leaves are huge, the size of small children. So if you do go into rainforest in Southeast Asia and you see massive leaves, generally they are devil's ivy. And there's a plethora of leaf colors and shades and variegation types. So you can get really dark green, which is the most common. You can get yellowy golden color. You get white green strips. You get white with green speckles. You get plain dark green with white spots. You get yellow green. There's a whole library of different colors you can get. And of course, it's climbing and trailing, so it provides a bit of interest in your home.
That sounds amazing. The white one with a little bit of green speckle. I noticed they are extremely expensive. Is that because of the variegation? Is it a rare sort of plant?
So generally speaking, there's quite a few exceptions, admittedly. Variegation is actually a genetic issue with the plant, so it's a bad thing essentially. But it provides this white strip or yellow strip, which doesn't really photosynthesize as much as other leaves, but it's very attractive to us, and it does provide a lot of interest in your home. So they do become very popular, and you have to literally wait until there's a genetic default in one of your plants, and pow.
That sounds amazing. I hadn't realized that variegation is actually sort of almost like a defect. But does it have any repercussions for the fact that, for instance, if you take the almost entirely white leafed one, does that mean you will have to provide it with much higher light conditions in order to give it the best chance, or does it not work like that?
It depends on quite a few factors and on the species of plant, so it's very, very variable. But speaking generally, if you have a variegated plant, it needs more sunlight because it has less chlorophyll. So it is a default, but we like that. So we're breeding plants with this default in. To be honest, it does provide a lot more interest. But if you put a variegated plant, generally speaking, I must stress this, in a darker area, it needs more photosynthesis and it's losing out on energy. So some plants can actually get rid of this or reduce their levels of variegation, such as the umbrella plant. They can actually reduce it so it fades, doesn't go away completely, and you'll sort of lose that attraction. So generally speaking, stress this, that if your plant is variegated, it needs a bit more light.
That might explain why my devil's ivy actually, when I got the mother plant itself, it was variegated, and it is now almost entirely green. There are some white spots on it, but it's mostly green, and I think it is again because it is sort of next to my desk in relatively dark conditions. But if I provided that same plant now with lighter conditions again, would the variegation come back?
Difficult to say, generally speaking. So if you do provide it with more light in it, the variegation, because it doesn't always completely go away, if it's faded, it will come back. If it's completely gone away, it's probably gone forever. But this is quite a general sort of discussion that we're having, even within devil's ivy. Sometimes if there's a little bit of variegation that's faded, if you put it back to a bright light condition, it will come back, and it might even come back even more if you put too much light. But of course you could burn the leaves, because these plants do not like direct sunlight, so if you put it in direct sunlight, it will scorch the leaves. But I would suggest play around, put your plant in indirect sunlight in a nice little corner, and if the variegation fades, then you know to give it a bit more light. And if you know it's fading a little bit, you can resurrect it really quickly. If it's completely gone, or if you don't want the variegation anymore, keep it in the same position.
You said they grow in Solomon Islands. Does that mean they like sort of a warm island climate?
They like warm conditions, but they're very tolerant. Obviously, if it's frosty, it's not going to be good for them. But the key thing is they like humidity. So if you put them near a kitchen or the bathroom, they'll thrive. If you don't have high humidity, or don't give them a misting every once in a while of water, they won't die, but they won't thrive. So if you don't want them to grow too much, it's fine. One of the best things about devil's ivy is that you can take cuttings from the leaf or cuttings from the stem and pop it into water, plain water, and within a couple of days you've got roots. It's prolific.
In the past, I've propagated it by taking a bit of the stem and putting it in water, and it grows roots really quickly. How would I do it with a leaf?
If you cut just below the leaf, you can put into water and it will generate little plantlets. Or if you take a full leaf cutting, so don't take the stem, it's more ideal in soil. So if you just put it vertically where you've made the cutting and put it into the soil, then it'll start sprouting out little stems and a brand new plant. But generally speaking, if you take the little part of the stem and put it into water, within days you'll get root growth.
I have a devil's ivy, which I took a little cutting from a friend's plant that I was looking after over lockdown, and it's done really well, and it's got really long, really quickly. But I want it to grow wider. Does the plant grow extra bits under the soil, or do I have to keep cutting bits off to make my plant more bushy? How do I do this?
There's a few house plants that are sold that aren't actually one plant. They're quite a few plants shoved together, so it's bushy. So for a lot of trailing and climbing house plants, it's literally 3 or 4 different plants put together. So like you've just said, you can take a cutting, and if there's a bald patch in your pot, you can take a few of these cuttings, put them round when they've rooted in the pot, and then it makes it bushier. And that's what they do in industry, because it would be a bit sad to have one little stem and it's growing all the way up. So generally speaking, climbers and trailing sort of plants, that's a collection of little plants put together.
If you have too many plants in one pot, then will they start competing for nutrients?
Yes, they will. So there is a balance. It's very difficult to work out this balance, but if you have, let's say, 5 cuttings of devil's ivy in a pot, it might be sustainable. It depends on the size of the pot, of course. But if then you then put 30 of these plants in, they're going to start competing very quickly. But when you have the right balance, it's almost like one plant. So they do compete, but when they compete too much, it's almost like the plant needs repotting. So you get a bigger pot, so there's more resources available. So it's about getting that balance. But obviously that balance is very tricky, and it's very hard to sort of discuss over a short podcast.
Cool. And so, are there any signs that it is unhappy?
So, as we've mentioned, if it's in too much light, it'll scorch and it'll look like almost it'll almost look like it's been put on fire. So it'll dry out on its tips and it'll crackle and it'll break apart. That's a sign of too much light. If it hasn't been watered enough, the leaves do droop and it looks sad. It looks very floppy and sad. So that's a very easy sign of please water me. And when watering, dry out the soil and then water again. It likes well draining soil, and ideally it would be in humid conditions. So if it's not getting enough humidity, generally the leaves bubble up, so you can see there's mottling effect, and that's an indication that it needs more humidity. And quite a few other houseplants do show this bubbling effect, or it sort of looks like blisters, that sort of thing. That's a sign of I need more humidity, please. But they're very tolerant and they come in such a big range. I think that's what makes them so unique. And of course, climbers, so you can put on a bookshelf, the drape down, or if you put them on a totem moss pole or dry pole, they can grow up. Just gives you a bit of variation from the standard plant. And they're known to be air purifiers, so they take out various chemicals from the atmosphere. Now, of course, opening doors and windows would be a lot more efficient, but it's nice to know this sort of thing.
And so, final question then, what is your favourite?
So my absolute favourite deviled ivy would be the light green with dark green splodges. So it's like a really funky art pattern. And of course, you get Snow Queen, and that is like a barcode white, light green, dark green. And that's just fabulous to have in your house.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you will join us again next time for more tips and tricks on how not to kill your plants.
If you'd like us to cover a specific plant or have any other questions, you can get in touch via botanicaldoctor.co.uk.